Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Math 150 Quantitative Reasoning Mathematics. In the previous video, we studied inductive reasoning and evidence. We learned that the quality of a conclusion depends heavily on the quality of the evidence supporting it. Today, we're going to apply that idea to several common fallacies found in media and political arguments. So let's go directly to the examples. Here are the list of 5 fallacies that you want to commit to memory. Right? So again, we're going to look at those fallacies. This one is how to identify and appeal to popularity. A commentator says millions support the inventions, so it must be morally justified. Identify the fallacy and identify what evidence popularity cannot replace. Okay, so millions of people support the invention, so it must be morally justified. What's wrong with the reasoning? What's wrong with the reasoning is the number of people who believe something does not determine whether the belief is true or justified. Okay. So this is an appeal to popularity. Okay. An appeal to popularity. In logical form, it's essentially saying many people believe X. Okay. Therefore, X is true. And that's not the case. Popularity cannot replace evidence. We would still need to examine the facts and arguments that support the invention itself. Okay, so that's an appeal to popularity fallacy. Here is a false cause example. So prices rose after sanctions were imposed. So a post claims sanctions alone caused every increase. Identify the fallacy and list 2 possible additional causes. Okay, so sanctions caused every price increase. Now, the timing alone does not prove that sanctions were the sole cause, right? People are like, well, President Donald Trump put tariffs on everybody. Those sanctions caused prices to go up. Well, that may be part of it, but it could be something else too. It could be the war. It could be, that the dollar was already declining. It could be, that capitalism is just economically not an advantageous economic system. It could be a host of things. But there were additional factors, such as, we'll say supply shortage, right? Maybe there's supply shortage. Fuel costs, right? Labor costs, okay? Um, change in demand. There's a number of things, right? Transportation problems, economic conditions. So event A happened before event B, right? That's essentially what they're saying. Event A happened before event B, right? But that does not automatically mean that A caused all of B. Okay. Um, okay. That's called a false cause. They're saying that look, this caused all of B, right? That's a false cause problem because you can't necessarily include that. There's a ton of other things that can be considered for the reason for this outcome. All right. Find an appeal to ignorance. An agency says no one has proved this surveillance program was abused, so it has never been abused. Explain any absence of proof. This is basically like saying, for example, you bring up an accusation and you're the first one to bring it up and you say, well, you know, the surveillance program was abused. And they, well, you're the first person to bring that up. Well, just because I'm the first person to bring it up doesn't mean it's not true. Okay. So saying this, the question is, does the conclusion follow? The answer is no. Okay. The statement is treating, that no proof of abuse, right? They're basically saying that, no proof of abuse, right, is essentially proof of no abuse. Okay. So again, no proof of abuse, they're essentially treating it as proof of no abuse. Okay. So symbolically, not if it if it's not proven true, therefore it's proven false. Okay. So, but that's not logically equivalent. So not proven true is not logically equivalent to proven false. And not proven false is not logically equivalent to proven true either, right? The absence of available proof does not automatically settle the question, okay? Because if someone says, "Oh, there's no proof that, you know, of this right here, therefore it must be false." Well, that's called an appeal to ignorance, okay? Example number 3. One person is convicted of benefit fraud, and a headline says that most recipients are dishonest. Explain why the sample cannot support that conclusion. Okay, so if the headline says that most benefit recipients are dishonest, what's the problem? Well, we have evidence about one person, right? One person is convicted of benefit fraud, but the conclusion is about most recipients. So if the population contained thousands or millions of people, then maybe, right? But one, that's nowhere near enough to justify that broader conclusion. So this is a hasty generalization. Okay. A hasty generalization off of literally one condition. The conclusion goes much further than the evidence supports. Okay. So they're generalizing, all people on the basis of one conviction, which is ridiculous. Example number 4. A speech says either approve the entire security bill or chaos will ensue. So identify at least 2 reasonable alternatives omitted by the argument. So again, this person, uh, they're presenting it as if you only have 2 choices. They're saying, they're saying, this is here's the must that approve an entire bill. That's what they're saying. Approve the bill or chaos, right? You only get those 2 choices. Either do this or this will happen, right? If you don't want this to happen, then do this. So they're limiting they're like putting you in an uncomfortable situation to make a choice, but there's always more than just these 2 choices, okay? Most of the time. So for example, you could modify the bill, right? That's another option. You can modify the bill. Um, you could approve, portions of the bill. Like, hey, we like part of the bill, but we want to, we'll approve some of it, and then let's go back to the drawing board. You could, reject provisions, right? You could propose a different security plan. You can delay the vote. So the argument is it creates an artificial either A or B. Okay. Okay. But again, there's other options clearly. We can come up with so many others. A common mistake, right? A student says a claim must be factual because it has 1 million likes, right? This man, look, there's so many people that agree with this comment, therefore it must be true, right? State what sources and evidence should be checked instead of just agreeing with something just because everybody else is agreeing with it. Okay. So, again, 1 million likes is not logically equivalent to proof. Just because someone has a million followers doesn't mean they're credible. Just because someone has 50 million followers doesn't mean that you should follow them too, right? But so many people get on this bandwagon, but they shouldn't be, right? So instead, check who made the claim, what evidence did they provide, what's the original source, can the data be verified, do independent sources support it? Population tells you how many people reacted to the claim, but it does not tell you whether the claim is true. Okay. All right. So, in closing, today we identify 5 common reasoning problems, and those fallacies were an appeal to popularity. It's basically someone saying, you know, something is true because many people believe it. False cause is basically saying that one event happened and therefore, it caused another without enough evidence, right? Appeal to ignorance is, treating lack of proof as disproof of proof, right? It's like, well, no proof of proof is proof of no absence. Or excuse me, the problem that we looked at was no proof of abuse is proof of no abuse. That was the one that we looked at. And hasty generalization is, let's just say you got one conviction for A, and then they say, well, all people are dishonest. Well, you can't say that. There's one conviction that happened, so you can't say necessarily all people are committing the same crime. Limited choice, that's essentially presenting 2 options. They're putting you in a box and saying that you must choose A or B, but there's always, most of the time, other options. Okay. All right. That concludes this one. And thank you again for watching. In the next video, we'll continue fallacies in the media part 2.